So we're going to be discussing the Epic of Askia Mohammed, and we're going to be doing a close reading of the text. As we discuss it, I'll refer to the line numbers rather than the pages on the text, because there are different versions of this out there, like in Thomas Hale's book, Scribe Griot Novelist, that would have different page numbers. So you can follow it according to the line number rather than the page number. Okay. So a few things to note. There are lines in the epic that are untranslatable, and this is also linked to this idea of sort of secret language that is only known to the initiated. And so Hale has a lot of really clarifying footnotes that you can read at the end, and he says, frankly, in those places where it's not translatable. Okay.
Is it not translatable because there's like too many words to try to relate that, or is it we are not getting that translation from?
It's not translatable because it's not meant to be translated. It's an esoteric language that only a very few people would know and will not reveal. And part of this is linked to the idea, that these are words of power imbued with, as you said, Yama, Mande epic, and so they're not translating them because you're not entitled to have them. And this is also an interesting phenomenon in post-colonial literature as well. Many contemporary post-colonial novelists will deliberately include, you'll see this when you read Yambo Wallagam's Le Devoir de Violence, that he has words that are Dogon words that he just inserts into the narrative and doesn't translate them for you. And you're deliberately kept out of the loop. That's kind of an interesting phenomenon. And so in this case, there are things that are just not going to translate for us. But we get the most important material here so we can follow the narrative. Let's note again that, as Thomas Hale says, that the griot is a kind of a wordsmith, like a blacksmith, who is a person who is an expert who handles a particular substance. In this case, we're talking about the substance of the human breath. And so the griot is a master of the word, and the word is a kind of toxic substance that you have to be very careful about, and that's why only certain people can handle it, because only certain people are sort of have inoculated, because of their own contamination, and then have the mastery and the ability to deal with this substance. Okay. Remember, for instance, we said that when the circumcisers circumcise, toxic amounts of yama are released, and so only particular people are entitled to do that. And the griot is one of those figures. Now, when we meet the griot tomorrow night, you might ask him, what does yama mean to you? See what he says. And I would really encourage you to take the material that you're hearing here and ask him and get another version of it. For instance, why are griots buried in boabab trees and so on? He may have some interesting things to tell you about that. So let's begin. So let's note that at the beginning of this book, before the narrative starts, Thomas Hale has nicely provided us with a genealogy of the Askia Mohammed. Okay. Now, as we're going to see, this genealogy is different than the genealogy of the Askias and the Tarikh el-Fattest. The genealogy is much more compressed here, and it's also, in some sense, mythological. And I mean by that, I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but simply it's been simplified to tell this tale, and some of the same characters that you see assume different importance in the different narratives. For instance, Casse, who was the mother of the Askia Mohammed, is mentioned in the Tarikh el-Fattest, but she's a relatively insignificant figure. In the Epic of Askia Mohammed, Casse is a figure of major importance. Now let's note here at the beginning that Mamar Kase is the way that the griot refers to Askia Mohammed, but Mamar Kase is Askia Mohammed. But note that the griot is emphasizing the maternal descendants of Askia Mohammed, and Kase is this very powerful figure in this narrative. Okay, Kase today, the figure Kase today, for instance, in Wanzube, if you read the research of Paul Stoller, remains her descendants remain very powerful witches or sorcerers in Wanzube, where the head of Sunni Ali Bur, or Shi Ali in the Tarikh, is said to be buried, and so it's a site of great power. If we had time, we would read Paul Stoller's Sorcerer's Travels, which has these stories about his visits there and some of the rather frightening encounters that he has with the sorcerers who are in Wanzube. Let's note here then that in this narrative, C was Sunni Ali Bur, referred to as the Shi Ali in the Tarikh al-Fattash, is said to be the uncle of the Askia Mohammed, and Kase is said to be the sister of Sunni Ali Bur, the mother of Askia Mohammed. Sunni Ali Bur, or Shi Ali, see in this narrative, was not really related to the Askia Mohammed. The Askia Mohammed in the historical narrative is a relatively he was a general in the army of Sunni Ali Bur, who rose to great prominence and significant standing. And when Shi Ali died, his son, the Shi Baru, inherited, in effect, the empire of his father, Sunni Ali Bur, who was a very powerful and brutal man, killed a lot of people. But also consolidated the empire. But the Shi Baru was not as dynamic, and the Askia Mohammed was able to challenge him and assume the role of the ruler of this dynasty. And that was the beginning of the Askia dynasty and the end of the Dia dynasty, that was the dynasty of Sunni Ali Bur.
Can you say one more time the name of the person that had the dynasty prior?
It was Sunni Ali Bur. So he has three different names that we're going to come across. In this narrative, he's referred to as Si.
Oh, okay.
But in the Tarikh al-Fattash, you'll see him referred to as the Shi Ali. But also, he's sometimes referred to as Sunni Ali Bur. Okay, and he was also in a dynasty, the Dia dynasty, that was quite old and began at a place called Kikuya, which was up the river from Gao. Some people credit the Shi Ali with actually being the real founder of the Songhay dynasty of the Askias, in the sense that he was so, he used his might and power to consolidate these disparate peoples, and then so the Askia Mohammed sort of walked into a nice situation where the Sunni Ali Bur had laid for him.
Are the Senegalese people knowledgeable about this genealogy?
Some might be, some not. We're going to see, for instance, it's interesting. Leopold Sédar Senghor, the president of Senegal, has a poem where he celebrates the Sunni Ali Bur in a very positive way. Whereas you see in the Tarikhs a very different view of Sunni Ali Bur, because it's written by the scribes who were all Muslims, and they really did not like him at all because he was very brutal towards the Muslims.
Do you know the name of that poem?
When we go to Gilor, we're going to go to the home of Leopold Sédar Senghor, and we can ask. We're going to get a lecture there, and I don't recall the exact name of it, but we can ask the lecturer who was speaking of this last year. So there's a lot of different spins on this history. By the way, another really wonderful text, if you want to read more about the Mande dynasty, we're going to hear the griot epic, is Kamar Alay's wrote a book called Guardian of the Word that has been translated into English. And it's a novelized version of the Sonjara epic, the Sundiata Keita epic. But there's also John Williams Johnson has a very prominent version of this that's similar to this, called the Epic of Sonjar. So you can read it in this kind of form with John Williams Johnson. If you want to read it as a novel, you can do that with the Khmer Lay version of this. Okay. So let's unpack this. So we know so the griot has celebrates Kase, and also the so-called father of the Askia Mohammed, who's said to be a jinn that lives in the river. All right, and now this is one of the things that we're going to see. Interestingly enough, is that whereas while many, if not all, in effect, or most, not all I should say, but most griots today in the Sahel are at least nominally Muslim and have some commitments to Islam. The griot traditionally is connected to the pre-Islamic culture that's far older than the time of the Prophet Muhammad, and certainly far older to the time of the coming of Islam to this region. Yes.
Can you just remind me what a jinn is?
A jinn. Okay,
yeah.
so in Islam, what we said. Okay, in Christianity we said there are angels and demons, and in Islam there are angels, demons, but also jinn. And jinn are not necessarily evil figures. Also in Islam, the jinn here is a very powerful and positive figure, but in Islam the jinn can sort of go either way, because they're bad jinn, they're good jinn. So we're going to see, for instance, a story in the Tarikh al-Fattash in which the Askia Mohammed has a dialogue with the jinn and tells him the story of the origin of the Sorko, the origin of the Tuareg, and so on. So it's because in the Islamic tradition, some jinn are said to have converted to Islam.
Are they thought to be like people, or do they manifest into different?
They're like there's a sort of a tradition of animal metamorphosis.
Okay.
And so they can assume human form, they can assume the form of an animal. So for instance, the jinn in this narrative who lives in the river, who is talking about this river deity, is said to be a kind of a fish, like in the story of the Osiris story, the fish with the ring in its belly. Just note that the fish gives his rings of power to the Askia Mohammed. But when he has relations with Kase, he transforms himself into a handsome man. You're also going to see an interesting story in the Tarikh al-Fattash when one of during the pilgrimage to Mecca, one of the pilgrims steps on a snake and accidentally kills it, and then they have to make a determination about should he be punished for killing this jinn. And then the determination is no, you can't. If the jinn has assumed an animal form, you can't punish somebody for that. So anyway, but obviously the Askia Mohammed had a real father. You'll learn about that in the Tarikh al-Fattash. But the griot is going to want to emphasize this older tradition of magic. And speak of this kingdom that exists under the water. When we get to the Tarikh al-Fattash, we'll look at the genealogies. We'll return to that and compare them. Okay. So, all right. So right now we're going to bracket off the second part of the narrative, where the figures Sumala Kasa and Amar Zumbani are very prominent. We'll get to those later. But those would be the equivalent of the generation of the Askia's grandchildren. Whereas, so generationally speaking, you have the Askia Mohammed, and then probably the two major sons that we need to focus on are the Askia Dawood, who rules over this period of prosperity, and then there's this figure, the Askia Musa, and you'll see him in the Tarikh al-Fattash, who is an accursed kind of figure because he usurped the power of his father. Because when Askia Mohammed got older, he became blind, and his son banished him to an island, and the Askia Musa took over, and he received the curses of his father for his ill treatment of his father. But the next generation would be the generation of when the dynasty fell into decline. And the main figure in that narrative is going to be a figure named Askia Isaac, who we'll get to. But the figure here, he becomes a figure named Sumalakasa. Sumalakasa is not really a historical figure, but a composite kind of figure of the various Askias that ruled in the later days when this fratricidal war broke out among the various grandsons of the Askia Mohammed. And note, let's go back to just note that when we talked about the film La Jeunesse, we were also talking about the theme of that film being fratricide, okay? And the filmmaker asking the question, why has West Africa been plagued with this history of fratricide? And so we're going to see that same theme in the Tarikh el-Fattah when this fratricidal war breaks out among the various brothers who are the grandsons of the Askia Mohammed. Okay, so now I don't have a clock here, so but we'll go as much as we can, and then we will take a break. I don't know if we'll be able to get through the whole first part of this now, so we'll just see how it goes. But I would rather do it slow and well than quickly.
It's 9:45.
Poorly. Okay, so maybe so just kind of keep me informed. So now you've got, notice in the introduction, you've also got Thomas Hale has made for us a really nice resume of the plot, so you can get a shorter version of that here at the beginning for the main things that happen. So I want to go over these together, and so we can emphasize those that are really the more important passages, and then we won't pay much attention to the passages that are not as important. Okay. So, all right, in the beginning of line 1, you can see the griot speaking of Mamar Kase, who is again, the name of the Askia Mohammed. You find him referred to in this way in Niger. If you go to like Gao, Timbuktu, not many people have heard that name, but or heard the Askia Mohammed referred to in that way. So this really emanates from Niger, this narrative. Notice we have this story. It has almost a kind of a biblical quality in the sense that you have the Si Ali who kills children. Okay, much like in the Gospels when in the time when the issue was ordered to kill the babies in Bethlehem when at the time of the birth of Christ. And so here you have Si killing the children of Kase, many children. He kills 7 of her children, as we see in line 17. And part of the reason why he does so is because Kase is a woman of power to be feared, and he fears that her son in particular would be somebody that might usurp his own power. And indeed, that is what happens. And so he's very frightened of this possibility. So Si, who is Sunni Ali Bur, is sitting on the throne, and he's killing all of Kase's children until, as we learn in lines 25, for instance, where it starts, that a man, one day she's down by the river, a man with beautiful clothes, wearing beautiful clothes, appears, a real man. Now this is the river jinn that has metamorphized into a man who's handsome with perfume, and he finds her beautiful, and they make love, and they gave birth to a boy, and the boy that they give birth to is Mamar Kase, or the Askia Mohammed. Okay. Now, because the sea has killed so many of her children already, she hides the baby, and she gives during the daytime the baby to a Berganche slave, or Hale translates the word captive. He translates the word captive, a slave, as captive, but that was a choice that he made. Slaves were in effect captives, but you could have translated this as slave also. They're terms that are effectively interchangeable. I mean, for instance, when we talk about the Tuareg the Tuareg have, there's a slave caste called the Bella, and they remain closely affiliated with the Tuareg today in this kind of capacity. But they were originally captives who amalgamated into a kind of a new ethnic group called the Bella, and but they're very acculturated in the Tuareg culture. This is one of the problems of sort of saying, well, Tuareg people should release these captives. Well, where would they go? I mean, they speak the same language as the Tuareg. They're closely linked to them. So it's a kind of a long-standing topic. But when she gives the baby to this captive, the sea, during the daytime, Kase pretends not to be related to this child, and the Bargache slave takes care of the baby and breastfeeds the baby, and and at nighttime the baby comes and sleeps with Kase. Now this is important because the Askia Mohammed is getting the milk from his mother, so he's getting that is part of his occult power, is that he's getting this sustaining bodily fluid from his mother, but he's also getting this sustaining bodily fluid from the Bargache slave during the daytime. So later, for instance, we're going to see these are the only people he's not able to defeat, because in defeating them, in effect, he would be defeating himself, because he has the fluids of the Bargache within himself, and so he leaves that. He doesn't pursue.
It's like Voldemort.
What's that?
It's like Voldemort.
Yeah, it's very similar.
Would this be like a form of niyama?
Yeah. It's that word is a word that you'll find in. There are different words for it. Like the Songhay word for it is Naxamala, but the Fulani word, the Pular word, is very similar. The vowel is a little bit more extended, but so you find, but it's the same word that you'll find in all of these different cultural traditions. And so what I would want to suggest is that, like for instance, when you study the literature of the West, the logos is the word for word, which is this Greek word which we discussed earlier, and that is an important word. That we could say, to put it in more contemporary terms, we could say European culture is a logocentric culture. The culture of the Sahel is a culture that is more centered around this idea of words as power, as niyama in effect. So I would encourage you tomorrow too to ask the griot, tell me a little bit more about what niyama is, and you'll find that it's translated in many different ways. Power means, but it also like a powerful means to an end. It can mean, but it can also mean fluids of the body. It can mean spirit. It can mean wind. But it's not a transcendental concept of spirit, and that's one of the things to note. It's not like the idea of the spirit as Holy Spirit, like in the Platonic Christian tradition of the Trinity. It's more a spirit that it's a occult word, but it's an occult materialism, not a transcendental idealism. It's not, the word is not underwritten by any transcendental ideal ground. It's something that circulates in the world as air, as wind that blows among us. Okay.
This is kind of an aside, but it occurred to me when I started taking malaria pills. With Yam and all this about like the transmission and the power of fluids, is there any strong belief about mosquitoes? Because they just steal and pass around liquids.
The way they lay eggs in your blood.
Well, that's
Wait.
Yeah.
but they.
Well, I don't know. You could ask the Rio, but I do know this is that one of the reasons why that you get contaminated with niyama, and so, for instance, there are people that if you run afoul of somebody, they will deliberately make you sick by putting their bodily fluids in your food, in order to get their vengeance upon you. But did you see this? What was this film called about the maids called The Help? You know what I'm talking about? There was a scene that you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Can we have an etiquette lesson at some point?
And don't make your cook angry. And of course, you eat with your right hand, not with your left hand. For your left hand is for purposes of cleansing. Is that another? Yeah.
What was I going to say? Oh, is there any connection between the impregnation of someone by a deity in this story and the Christian tradition and story of Jesus?
I think in this case, well, see, it's the river Djian is if we even speak of this. I think what is in effect a Leviathan. We've been talking about Moby Dick, and so that would be an appropriate point of comparison. Becomes a jinn after Islam. Okay, in the Tarikh al-Fattash, you're going to see him. You're going to see the author Mamukati say that he only fears one. The jinn only fears one man. It's Suleiman. Now, Suleiman, the prophet Suleiman in Islam is the prophet Solomon in Judeo-Christian tradition. And Solomon, if you know your biblical history, is said to have mastered all of the wisdom of ancient Egypt, which is to say Solomon was in effect a very powerful sorcerer. And in the Quran, Solomon, or Suleiman, is said to be master of the jinn who obey his command. So, for instance, in the Tarikh al-Fattash, the jinn is under the control of Solomon or Suleiman. But when we also have to be aware, for instance, when we talked about in the Osiris story, how you have a fish, with the ring in its belly under the sea, which is the phallus of Osiris, that this is a story that is much older than any of the Abrahamic traditions. It links to the culture of ancient Egypt, and so ancient Egyptians and let's say pre-Islamic Sahelian peoples would not have thought of the jinn as or as this river entity as a jinn. This already reflects a kind of the fact that the culture's been Islamicized. But the way I think in my reading, the proper way to think of the jinn in the river is as a Leviathan. Okay, like in Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, which is again we said the figure of the Republic or the Res Publica. So it's the jinn is said to be the pre-Islamic ruler of the Songhai peoples, and so it's a kind of a figure that is conjured into being as an image of the sovereignty, of the Songhai. And so in both the Tarikh al-Fattash and the Tarikh al-Sudan, the story that we get is that the jinn is killed by these two Muslim brothers who some say come from Yemen, some say from Mecca, but they kill this fish, and so this is not just historically important, but this is emblematic of this shift from the pre-Islamic Egypto-African culture of sorcery to the Islamicized culture that then enters with the coming of Islam. When Arabs come into the region, bringing Islam with them. So it's a kind of an emblematic moment in this history. Okay, but note here that this jinn who's said to be killed by the Arabs in the Tarikh al-Fattash is very much alive, okay, and rules under this vast kingdom that is under the water. It comes up from this kingdom to sit on the throne and rule the Songhai. And when you think of, like, for instance, when he meets, let's skip a little ahead. If you look, when he gives his rings on lines 146. Okay, so start at even 141. He says, put the ring on your hand, but don't put it on until you get to the river. And then when you get to the river, put it on, and at that moment you will see your father. All right. So again, the fish with the ring in its belly. Okay, he takes off the ring, or his mother gives him the ring. He doesn't work. He gets to the river. He puts the ring on, And it's like, I mean, I'm sure all of you've seen, the Lord of the Rings, Hobbit. It's very, this idea that this ring of power. Even in the case of the Lord of the Rings, we can say one ring to find them in the darkness, bind them. And so the ring is a figure, again, of the covenant. And just like in this story, in the Lord of the Rings, the ring is also a very powerful magical object, a very powerful magical fetish. Now we said the ring is the remainder, that what remains after circumcision, so it's a phallic symbol, but that remainder is a fetish. Now do you remember in La Jeunesse when we saw this woman saying, eat the ring and so you'll be possessed by the devil. So she says, eat what remains after the circumcision, so you'll be possessed by devils. So the ring is not just an object; it's an object of power. And I think the Lord of the Rings is certainly appropriate because it's a very similar dynamic that is at work. So he puts this ring of power on, and when he does this, he says the water opens up, and under the water there are so many cities. I mean, I would like in here. Let me notice this. We're talking about these movies and films and book Star Wars. I think of when the Jar Jar Binks. It
is down there.
Yeah,
that's what I thought of.
Yeah, very similar. Yeah. So, and then he sees this kingdom that his father rules, who is this powerful jinn. And the jinn gives him his a white stallion. He gives him a shield, a saber, and he goes and he finds his uncle C, who is praying at prayer. And while his uncle is at prayer, he kills him. He comes up behind him. Says the horse gallops swiftly. He's approaching. And then the griot stutters until, and then he kills C. And this is the moment when he assumes when the Askia assumes his power as he kills his wicked uncle C. All right.
In a lot of portions of this, there's like repetition, whether it's line repetition or repetition, like with the release here, and then on the previous page, like Sai continued to have the child work, like repeats.
Yeah.
Is that like for a musical element in the piece, or is it for
It's
passing of time or emphasis?
And I'm glad you asked that because that's definitely the case. And also, it's performative. It's important to remember this. We're reading this as a text, but this was performed, and it was not performed at one setting. You couldn't do it in one setting, and so that's important to note too. Is that it's kind of weird to read it as one continuous narrative. What generally happens is, like we're going to see, for instance, when we see the Monday griot tomorrow night, is that the griot will perform a particular piece. Will have memorized the entire epic. Remember, the word epic means voicing, and this is a voicing in effect. Just like the Homeric narrative, both the Iliad and the Odyssey were voicings, and so. The griot chooses a portion of the epic to perform based on the context, and the selection of what he chooses to perform is significant. So we'll see what aspect of the Sundiata Keita narratives that the griot will perform for us tomorrow night, because he'll choose it for us and it's to be interactive. So it's kind of, not only is it a kind of a distortion for it to appear as a text in a written form that we see with our eyes as opposed to hear with our ears, it's also distortion in the sense that it appears as one long narrative. So like Khmer Lake does the Sundiata Keita epic in a novel. Well, already that's a kind of the novel, generically speaking, that's a kind of a format that's more of a European genre than the local format. But this is the kind of thing that contemporary novelists will interplay, using genres from the past and interacting with more contemporary genres.
It also touches on that on page 7, talks about the emphasis of the repetition and then to indicate passage of time.
Yes.
How long are the passages? Like when you watch this performance, is it like multiple songs or is it all just one big long?
It's what does he say? He tells us at the beginning that how many nights he went. He heard him play over many nights. I think, or at least 3 or 4 nights.
Because he got sick or something at one point.
Yeah, he got sick, and he was a very old man when he transcribed it. It says, I recorded from nearly 24 griots, 40,000 miles while serving as and he says, well, but, anyway, you can read more about that. By the way, Thomas Hale has a book called The Scribe Griot Novelist, where he compares the Tarikh with this griot epic and Yamba Wallagam's novel. You're going to be reading all three, so that might be an interesting thing for you to look at too if you want to look at a more extended scholarly comparison.
Can you remind us what the word Askia means?
Yeah, in the Tarikh you'll find that there's this sort of legend that that it's etymology. And I think Kati disputes it, but the etymology is said to be from when the Askia Mohammed defeats the son of Sunni Ali Bur, or the Shibaru, when he defeats him. The daughters of Sunni Ali Bur, the Shi Ali, say, in effect, he shall not be it. Askia, he shall not be it. And the Askia is sort of charmed by this, and so he assumes that for his title. All right, but that's a legend. And as Kati tells us, there were Askias before the Askia who were more kind of like they were smaller functionaries among the Songhay. But that because it was a new dynasty, he assumes this word. Now, as we're going to see, one of the differences between the two is that whereas the Shi Ali was very brutal to the scribes, Askia Mohammed worked with the scribes and the jurists of Timbuktu, and so they like him very much, because of that. And that's one of the reasons why this history is transmitted to us in this form, in which the Sunni Ali Bur is constantly denigrated as this brutal tyrant. But remember, we're getting him through the eyes of the Islamic scribes. Okay, so let's continue, and we'll take a break here in a bit. So note on line 212, we get this sort of story with the Sunni Shia, the Askia Mohammed or Mamakase assumes his power. But then as we go down further, we have, says a griot, we see the creation of a griot, and note that the griot who is created is a griot who is a descendant of Sunni Ali Bur, or the sea, but the griot now sings the praises of the Askia Mohammed. So it's the son of Shi Ali who has now bent the knee to the Askia Mohammed, and he becomes, a griot of the Askia Mohammed. So this links him to the griot. The griot is linked, then you might notice, to Sunni Ali Bur or to Shi Ali, and the griot is linked to Kase. And so the griot we're going to see is in this narrative is constantly reaffirming the a more conservative worldview, and this sort of even though again nominally Muslim, but affirming the world of magic, and affirming the world of the of the sorcerers, to which the griot is himself linked. Okay, so note, for instance, on line 220, the second son appears. He brought a handful of razors. He dumped them down. He became a Sohansi. So these are also like, magicians, and they do circumcisions. Okay, again, because as we said, circumcision is a kind of a toxic, releases this toxic substance. And note too, the griot in this is also a namer, and so the griot is kind of like in the Judaic tradition, it's kind of like a moil who presides over the circumcision, but in doing that gives the name to the child. And so griots are in a weird way have a sort of they're kind of like moils in a weird way. And so then we get after that we get the story of what the Askia Mohammed does when he's in his capacity as a Askia, and he begins a kind of a jihad. Let me pause. Do we want to take a break now? Can we go on some more?
It's 10:05.
So how long have we been going?
39 minutes.
39 minutes. All right, why don't we go just a few more minutes, and then we'll take a little break, okay? So we say, on line 242, or 240, any village that he hears is trying to resist, that is not going to submit, he gets up and destroys the village. If the village accepts, he makes them pray. If they resist, he conquers the village, he burns the village. Mamar made them convert, Mamar made them convert, Mamar made them convert. Okay? Now this history of forcible conversion at the edge of the sword, is a history we're also going to explore when we read this book, which I put for you on canvas on the archive of the Amari and Tijani, because we're going to see a very similar kind of pattern when Al-Hajj al-Martal in the 19th century, about the time of the American Civil War, conducts his very famous jihad. And so this is interesting to note, because we just recently had this situation in Mali where the Ansar Deen and Al-Qaeda and Islamic Maghreb came into that part of Mali and conducted yet another jihad. So, but it's important to note that that's a very ancient part of this culture. There have been these sort of histories of these kinds of jihads, and they often have been very terrible. Okay, but let's talk about his trip to Mecca, and then we'll take a break. So then after he conducts these jihads, he goes to Mecca, and this is, of course, the Askia Mohammed also traveled to Mecca. Sunjata Keita traveled to Mecca. Al-Hajj al-Martal, the Haji is somebody who's traveled to Mecca. He also traveled to Mecca. So there's this sort of long history of if you're Islamic, to go in a culture that was not originally Islamic, but has this much deeper pre-Islamic history. But there's this history then of powerful rulers who go to Mecca in order to get ordained to come back as people who have sort of gotten the blessings of the family of the Prophet Muhammad in Mecca. And so we've talked about this with relation to this sort of called Sharifan ideology. And so the history of the Sharifs is a history of using this genealogical link to the family of the Prophet Muhammad to empower oneself, to claim a kind of the divine right to rule in the name of the Prophet Muhammad and his family. Okay? And so that's partly what's going on here. The Askia Mohammed goes to Mecca, he gets the blessings of those who are in Mecca, and he comes back and he's been ordained to rule. We'll come back to this in the Tarikh al-Fatash as well, and we'll see what happens. And the same thing happened with Al-Hajj al-Martal. He goes to Mecca, he gets initiated into, he already knew about the Tijani order before he went over there, but he goes there and he learns more about it from a disciple of the founder of the order, Ahmad al-Tijani, and whose name is Muhammad al-Ghali. And he then is sort of authorized by Ghali to conduct his jihad before he goes back to the Sahel and launches his jihad. Okay? But this is the version of the griot, and the griot version is going to again emphasize the question of sorcery. Okay. Now on 273, we have the whole question of the Bargache alluded to again, who we cannot convert and cannot defeat. They're the one people who he can't defeat, and that's because, again, he has the milk of a Bargache captive in his belly. And so notice on 3:14 then, this is where he's in Mecca and he makes the pilgrimage and he goes to the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad. Okay, we're going to see the same thing when we read about Al-Hajj al-Martal. Al-Hajj al-Martal goes to the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad and he swears oaths on the tomb. Okay, now when Al-Qaeda and Islamic Maghreb, or Akim and Ansar Deen, came into Timbuktu in 2012, 2013, one of the things that they did is that they destroyed a lot of the tombs that are there. And so the Wahhabi, who are this more conservative interpretation of Islam that emanates out of Saudi Arabia, are totally opposed to praying at tombs and to swearing oaths at tombs. But this we find here, Mamar Qaseh swearing an oath on a tomb, and we're going to see that same theme in the Tarikh al-Fattash. It's a very important thing. People even today swear, go to the tomb of Muhammad Khati in Timbuktu and pray for rain. So if you pray at a tomb or you swear an oath at a tomb, very powerful things can happen as a result of that. But what the Wahhabi consider to be magic, and they link to sorcery, and they don't want any part of it.
Is the tomb then an image?
The tomb is a site where the dead are buried and where the dead reside. Okay, so remember, the culture of Egypt is a mummified culture. Okay, the culture of the ancient Egyptians, and so the person is there. Now, in effect, what happens is that when you swear an oath at a tomb, like when Hajj Martal swears an oath at the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad with Muhammad al-Ghali, the Prophet Muhammad is said to serve as a witness to the oath that is sworn. Okay? Now, so when you swear an oath, it's important that there be witnesses there, just like when you at a wedding. People exchange vows, they swear their oaths, but they do it in front of a group of people, so that binds them in a particular way because they've sworn publicly to do this. And so if you swear an oath at the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad is a witness to your oath, and that binds you in a very powerful way, so that if you become then an adulterer or a vow breaker, then that's a very then you're going to pay very severe consequences for that. So one other example that's going to be very important in the Tarikh al-Fattash is that the Askia Mohammed is going to swear an oath to a person named Mori Hargaru, who is that his descendants won't be enslaved. And in fact, when the empire collapses, the descendants of the Mori Hargaru are enslaved. And this is said to be one of the reasons for the collapse of the dynasty, is because the ancestors of the Askia Mohammed did not honor the oaths of their father that were sworn on the tomb of the Prophet.
Can the tomb be seen as an image in the same sense of like in certain Islamic beliefs that
like it's a kind of violation of the second commandment?
Yes.
When the Wahhabi destroyed back in I think it was in the 19th century, they destroyed the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad. Not long after Hajj Martal went there and swore oaths there, and they destroyed it because they were afraid that people were fetishizing the Prophet Muhammad, and so they saw that as a form of idolatry. And people today that take the pilgrimage to Mecca, one of the first things that they're told is that, you can go to see Medina, which was the city of the Prophet, but it's not, understand, we're not worshiping Prophet Muhammad. So their fear is that people are doing that. But they're also motivated in rejecting it because of the renunciation of the culture of sorcery, from which they see this tradition, they see this being a non-Islamic, pre-Islamic kind of belief. And indeed it is, swearing oaths and vows and thinking of the word that comes out of your mouth as having a kind of magical quality is certainly a pre-Islamic belief.
But isn't that like just replaced by making covenant with God?
The Abrahamic covenant.
Right?
Yeah, they're important links.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that in the Abrahamic traditions, one doesn't tend to think of the ring as being a fetish.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact we've generally have lost our understanding of what rings are. I mean, so whenever I talk about this in classes, people are always kind of like, oh my gosh, the wedding ring has that kind of connection. It's kind of like, oh yeah, it makes people uncomfortable, a bit uncomfortable. But this is a very old. This is something that's very, very old, very, very ancient. But I want to note here too that note on line 318. Now have them go to get large pieces of iron chain, tie it around his waist. Some strong men should stay behind him and hold tightly onto the chains. They brought the iron chains, attached them to a well. He goes down with these chains attached to him as he descends into the tomb. Okay. Now think of the chain here. We saw. I put this video on Canvas, The Magicians of Wanzerbe, where the sorcerer sort of vomits up the chain and then swallows it again. Okay, to think of the chain as, again, a chain is a connection of rings. So think of when the sons of the Askias don't honor the vows of the father, the chain is broken, and that's partly what leads to the collapse of the empire. So the chain is also a symbol of the generational covenants, the vows that are made, and so it's an object of great power. But note too that when he gets into the tomb, he sees onion shoots and he eats the onion shoots. And so the onion shoots are growing out of the body of the Prophet Muhammad. So if he eats the onion shoots, he's taking the niyama of the Prophet Muhammad into his body. Okay? Now note when you get into the Tarikh al-Fattash, it's not likely that this actually happened, but there is a story. It was probably the origin of the story is that in the Tarikh al-Fattash, the Askia Mohammed is talking with somebody, and the person says, well, I got here in my hand here a couple of hairs from the head of the Prophet Muhammad. And the Askia Mohammed looks at it, and he reaches over and grabs it and pops it in his mouth and swallows it. And it essentially steals it. But Tati says, oh, what a wonderful thing that is. You know, how blessed he is. You know, he doesn't see it as problematic at all. But so he swallows the hair, and he has, again, I mean, this is Islamic on the one hand because he's honoring the Prophet Muhammad, but this is a pre-Islamic, you know, notion. The idea that if you consume the fluids of somebody else, that it will have this kind of effect on you, and it also indicates your subservience in effect to that person. I mean, I don't want to. I mean, think of, for instance, even the idea of communion. I mean, you take the body into your own body to profess the lordship of Christ. So it's a similar kind of idea, and so, but it's also in this case it's more linked to sorcery in the sense that he's got this powerful niyama within him. Okay. From consuming the fluids of Askia Mohammed. Okay, so we're almost done here. So he goes to the indigo tree, which is a figure of the Kaaba, which we talked about, the cube in Mecca. So he goes around the indigo tree, goes around the Kaaba. He gets the sword of Dongo, which is truth. He's going to bring this back to him. Think of this as like a symbol of the scepter. It's a phallic symbol. It's the symbol of the king, of his sovereignty, as the ruler of the Songhay. And then on line 380, when you reach the land of the Bargache, his mother tells him, watch out for them because you have the milk of a Bargache woman in your stomach. You will not be able to conquer them. Okay? Now, it's almost the first part of this hourglass. We're coming to the end of it. The Sohansi flies, we're told. Remember, there's this idea again of animal metamorphosis, which is linked to the culture of sorcery. You can read the Golden Ass, for instance, and you'll see about how sorcery and is linked to the idea of shape-shifting, turning into animals. The Sohansi flies faster than airplanes, right? And then we kind of effectively come to the end of this story, the first part of it, and on line 425. We get to the birth of Dauda, who is Daud. This is the son of the Askia who rules during this peaceful time. So then we get into that period, the skinny part of the hourglass, where not much of significance occurs. Okay, so let's stop at this point because now we've got to the end of the first part of the epic, and then we can take a break and come back and we can go to the